On the night of March 27, 1999, at approximately 8:40 p.m. local time, an F-117A Nighthawk, the world's first operational stealth aircraft, was tracked, engaged, and destroyed by a Serbian surface-to-air missile battery operating a Soviet-built system that had entered service nearly 4 decades earlier. The wreckage came down near the village of Budanovci, roughly 45 kilometers northwest of Belgrade, inverted and largely intact, its left wing blown away, its classified radar-absorbent material coating exposed to the cold Serbian night. Parts of that wreckage were later transported to Moscow and Beijing for technical exploitation. The damage done that evening was not limited to one airframe. It was strategic. This is not a story about luck. It is a story about physics, about institutional overconfidence, and about one remarkably disciplined Serbian officer who understood both his weapon and his enemy better than anyone in NATO believed possible.
The F-117A Nighthawk was the product of Lockheed's Skunk Works Bureau, born from the lessons of the 1973 Yom Kippur War, when Soviet-supplied SAM systems decimated Israeli air operations and proved that conventional aircraft were acutely vulnerable to modern integrated air defenses. The Nighthawk's design logic came from an unlikely source, a 1964 paper by Soviet physicist Pyotr Ufimtsev, which demonstrated mathematically that an object's radar cross-section, its RCS, was determined not by physical size, but by the geometry and configuration of its edges and surfaces. Lockheed's engineers applied Ufimtsev's equations to design a completely faceted airframe, flat, angled panels that deflect incoming radar waves away from the emitting antenna rather than returning them as a strong reflection. A standard fighter presents an RCS equivalent to a large truck. The F-117A's RCS in the X-band frequency range has been estimated at approximately 0.0025 square meters, roughly the radar signature of a large steel ball bearing. This reduction was further enhanced by radar-absorbent material, RAM, a specialized carbonyl iron coating applied across the entire airframe, converting incident radar energy into heat rather than reflecting it. The F-117A flew 1,280 combat sorties over Iraq in 1991 without losing a single aircraft. Going into Operation Allied Force in 1999, every empirical data point told American mission planners that the Nighthawk was safe. That confidence, as it turned out, contained the seeds of its own destruction. The weapon system that downed Vega 31 was the S-125 Neva, NATO designation SA-3 GOA, a Soviet surface-to-air missile complex that had first entered service in 1961. By 1999, Western analysts generally regarded it as a legacy second-tier system, not a credible threat to a stealth aircraft with electronic warfare support. That assessment failed to account for the man operating it, Colonel Zoltán Dani, commanding officer of the 3rd Battery, 250th Air Defense Missile Brigade of the Yugoslav Army. Dani was an exceptional officer who had studied NATO suppression of enemy air defenses, SEAD tactics, with the rigor of a professional engineer. He understood precisely why Iraqi SAM batteries had been destroyed in 1991. They were predictable, they emitted radar signals for too long, and they stayed in one place. Dani ensured none of those vulnerabilities applied to his unit. He trained his crews to deploy the S-125 system in 90 minutes against a standard 150-minute setup time, and required his SNR-125 low-blow fire control radar to be active for no more than 20 seconds before mandatory shutdown and relocation. He positioned decoy emitters built from salvaged MiG aircraft components to attract AGM-88 HARM anti-radiation missiles. Over the course of Allied force, his battery absorbed 23 harm strikes without losing a single launcher. The man was not merely a soldier with old equipment. He was a tactician who had solved the problem of survival in a hostile electromagnetic environment more thoroughly than many of his adversaries had solved the problem of defeating him. The F-117A was optimized to defeat radar operating in the X-band and S-band frequency ranges, the centimeter wavelength bands used by virtually all modern fire control systems. But radar physics imposes an unavoidable limit on this approach. As frequency decreases and wavelength increases into the very high frequency (VHF) range, the wavelength begins to approach and eventually exceed the physical dimensions of the aircraft's structural features. At that point, the aircraft no longer scatters the radar wave, it resonates with it. The flat facets and angled edges that make the Nighthawk invisible at X-band frequencies become far less effective at VHF wavelengths, generating a detectable resonance return. Dani's primary detection sensor was the P-18 Spoon Rest D VHF early warning radar. When tuned to its lowest operational frequency, approximately 140 MHz, the P-18 could detect the F-117 at a range of roughly 25 kilometers. That is a narrow detection window, but Dani recognized it as a targeting cue. Enough directional information to orient his SNR-125 low-blow fire control radar within a tight search cone, dramatically reducing the time that radar needed to remain active before achieving a weapons-grade track. Critically, the frequency of 140 MHz fell entirely outside the calibrated warning range of the F-117A's radar warning receivers. The Nighthawk's electronic warfare suite was designed around X-band and S-band threats. It was effectively blind to the P-18's VHF emissions. Pilot Lieutenant Colonel Dale Zelko received no indication whatsoever that he was being tracked. On the evening of March 27, 1999, three critical factors aligned against Vega 31 simultaneously. First, the EA-6B Prowler electronic warfare aircraft assigned to the Night Strike package, whose powerful AN/ALQ-99 tactical jamming system would have flooded Serbian radar frequencies with broadband noise, were grounded due to adverse weather. Mission planners launched the F-117A strike anyway, correctly reasoning that the Nighthawk had never required Prowler escort before. Second, Yugoslav military intelligence assets monitoring activity at Aviano Air Base had deduced the F-117A's approximate departure windows and likely ingress corridors through prior pattern analysis over 3 nights of Allied force operations. The Nighthawk flew the same general routes at broadly similar times on each mission. Third, and most critically, on this particular flight, Vega 31 had opened its bomb bay doors over the target area to release its ordnance. The act of opening those doors fundamentally altered the aircraft's RCS for the duration of the release sequence, briefly presenting an electromagnetic signature dramatically larger than the aircraft's nominal stealth configuration. At 8:40 p.m., with his P-18 radar having cued him to the target's approximate bearing and range, Colonel Dani activated the SNR-125 low-blow fire control radar in a narrow, pre-oriented search sector. Within seconds, he achieved a firm weapons-grade track on Vega 31. He launched 2 V-601M missiles, Mach 3.5 154-pound proximity-fused fragmentation warheads before mandatory radar shutdown. One missile detonated close aboard the Nighthawk's left wing. Lieutenant Colonel Dale Zelko ejected successfully and was recovered by a CSAR team before dawn. The aircraft, serial number 82-0806, call sign Vega 31, was gone. The downing of Vega 31 did not represent a failure of stealth technology. It represented the specific, exploitable limitations of first-generation stealth architecture when encountered by a disciplined, technically sophisticated adversary operating outside the threat parameters that architecture was designed to defeat. The F-117A was never invisible. It was optimized against a defined set of radar frequencies. Colonel Dani found the edges of that optimization envelope and worked within them with extraordinary discipline. The tactical lessons were absorbed quickly. Modern fifth-generation aircraft, including the F-22 Raptor and F-35 Lightning II, incorporate significantly more broadband stealth designs, curved, blended surfaces rather than flat facets, optimized across a wider frequency range, including lower bands, a direct lineage traceable to the events of that March night over Serbia. The wreckage of serial number 820806 remains on display at the Aviation Museum in Belgrade. Colonel Dani later stated, simply and without theater, "They are good, but they are not invisible." He was right, and the United States Air Force has been building better aircraft ever since because of it.